My name's Megan Fisher. I'm the CEO at Energy Lab, and I'm also going to be your moderator for today's session with our wonderful panel. The event today is also brought to you by our partners, GHD. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we are meeting today. I am on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging of any Aboriginal communities who may be joining us today. I would really also like to send my thoughts to those impacted by what's happening in the Ukraine, and also with the dreadful flooding that's happening in Queensland. There's certainly some challenging things that are going on in the world right now. So, for today's panel, we're focusing on energy storage as we transition to renewables and a more variable energy supply. There is a need to expand the capacity, the capabilities, and the business models that enable generated energy to be time shifted to match usage demands. Energy storage is the major solution when it comes to this requirement, but it's also an incredibly broad topic. So today we plan to cover emerging technology, economics and business models, the exciting startups that are focused on storage, and some real world examples of how storage is helping with the energy transition. I imagine we'll be flying in between grid scale storage and residential storage. So all of those things are bound to be covered today. So joining us today are some incredibly knowledgeable people in energy storage. And I'm delighted to have them with me on the panel today. I'm going to introduce the panel one at a time, and they're going to tell you a little bit more about themselves before we head into questions. So first, we have Jacques Mcraf, who is the COO at Lavo. Welcome, Jacques.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everybody. So Jacques Mcraf, Chief Operating Officer for Lavo. We are a clean technology company, a clean tech startup company powered by green hydrogen based here in Sydney. In my role as COO, I sort of straddle the value chain from investment, corporate development, also around the product development and commercialization, all the way through the value chain to sort of support functions in the business as well. Prior to joining Lavo, I had about over 12 years experience, should I say 20 years experience, beg your pardon, in various commercial and strategy roles spanning multiple industries, including energy. And I played a role in Providence Asset Group, which is an ESG dedicated investment firm, as an executive advisor prior to this role, which is one of our parent companies.
Fabulous. Great to have you with you.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us, should I say. So over to you, Christian Schaefer, who's the Executive Advisor for Power Systems for GHD. Hi, Christian.
Hey, how you doing, Megan? And I'm
really
not
well.
camera shy. I just have some issues with the camera actually working with this app. So you'll have to listen to my dulcet tones instead and just imagine what I look like. So hey, everybody, great to be here. My name's Christian Schaefer. As Megan had said, I am an advisor in the energy policy and power system space, working within the regulation and assurance team at GHD. Now, for those of you who don't know who GHD is, no, it's not a hair straightener or a hairdryer. It actually is a global and international engineering company. We've got offices in more than 130 countries and more than 200 offices, I should say, around that space. And we're a leading consultant in the energy space, committed to sustainable development, and particularly in the energy storage space. GHD has been very heavily involved in around 20 projects within Australia, either in the study or development phase. I believe that's representing about 2 gigawatts of storage, either in the early phases or even in the operational space. We're involved with the Hornsdale Power Reserve, for example, in the project management and owner's engineer role that we provided to Neoin. And for other projects, we have provided EPC and O&M specifications, but not only in battery storage. We also have a very active and extensive pump storage hydro group, for example, that has been involved in the Kidston pump storage hydro design, the 250 megawatt plant, for those of you familiar. For Snowy 2.0, we have completed deep geological borehole works, and we're currently supervising the design and of the construction camp at Cabramatta. So we've got a bit of skin in the game and a lot of interest and some very passionate people involved in this. Looking forward to join the discussion.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Christian. Talking to you, it's like I'm on a radio show, which is fabulous. A little bit back, but it's still great. Okay, next we have Ben Hutch, who's the CEO and Managing Director of Evergen. Welcome, Ben. Over to you to talk about yourself and your startup for a bit.
Good afternoon, Megan and everyone else. So my name's Ben. I've been CEO of Evergen for almost 3 years now, and Evergen is a software platform that effectively connects devices across the energy system. We've been very, active proponents of storage in a renewably powered grid, and it's delightful to see so many different types of storage being deployed behind the meter and in front of the meter, not just here in Australia, but now elsewhere in the world. And so we're delighted to be here, and happy to be a contributor.
So I'm going to kick off in a minute with questions for today's panel. We've got a few to go through, but there's also opportunities for questions from the audience. So put your questions in the Q&A or the comment section on the right-hand side of your pages, and feel free to mention the panelist. If you've got a particular question for a particular panelist, feel free to mention those, and we'll get to those at a little bit later on in our chat. So I think we are ready to get going. All right, first question. Here we go. So we hear and we know that storage is going to be essential for the energy transition to renewables due to the variable nature of them. What are some real world examples you've seen where storage has created, the opportunity for more energy to be consumed? Like, where is it actually happening in a practical application? I might start with Christian. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Megan. Look, I think first of all, energy storage is really an old problem, but it's finding new solutions and opportunities driven by technology, the environment that we're in. And even if we look at before, we had storage in big piles of coal or in pumped water into reservoirs, all sorts of stuff. When we're looking now at the new applications and the drivers and the need for it, there certainly is the large end of town where we're seeing big batteries. Hornsdale Power Reserve I mentioned before, and there's a few others. The Escrew batteries, Victoria's not shy in building an even bigger battery, and a number of other projects are doing the same. Snowy 2.0, as I've said, there are a lot of opportunities, and there will be a need as particularly we start to retire some of our thermal generating fleet. And as Emo has already said, there's going to be quite a lot of that in the years to come. And as AGL and Origin have announced, it might even come sooner than we expect. When we look at the small end of town, though, we're seeing a lot of movement happening there as well. I just need to point out Synergy and Ausgrid, who are looking at community batteries to find a way that all that rooftop solar scattered throughout Australian suburbs is going to be able to be managed, and that people aren't just wasting it, that it can be stored, withdrawn. So there's going to be a lot of stuff happening, I think, at both ends of the spectrum.
Thank you for that, Christian. Jacques, I might hand over to you for some real world examples of where you're seeing storage really creating that ability for more renewables to hit the grid.
Thanks, Megan. Yes, so Lava is developing, as Christian said, certainly a lot of solutions around the utility scale and also commercial industrial applications. We're a hybrid company, so we combine the best of what a traditional battery energy storage and hydrogen energy storage can offer. Batteries, particularly lithium, play an important role with shallow energy storage. So we think of that sort of under the up to 4 hours of energy. So high frequency energy, responding into the grid. Providence Asset Group, one of our parent owners, have a portfolio of around 40 solar farms, 5 megawatt scale across Victoria and New South Wales. So we're rolling out that across 16 of those active assets right now, battery energy storage, with hydrogen energy storage to come soon thereafter. And then the remaining of those sites will then also take that into it. So it's a hybrid technology that offers really that shallow, medium, and then long duration storage. So for us, we think of medium storage as sort of anything over and about 4 hours or so. Under 4 hours is sort of shallow storage, and then medium and long storage beyond that. So batteries are fantastic for that instant response rate. But again, if you're talking about medium and deep storage, we believe the best solution you can offer there is a full range service that offers both battery energy storage and hydrogen energy storage in the utility scale. So that's a bit about utility. I think according to EMO, the national energy market is forecast to require about 12 gigawatts by 2040 of storage. I think Baringa was saying something in the region of 32 gigawatts of storage. So a huge amount of storage required there to actually help with this transition. So for us, utility is our priority number one, and we're developing a large utility scale solution in hydrogen that can store upwards of 12 megawatt hours of energy storage in a single container that's about 20 foot long and about half height. And then in the commercial and industrial space, we also bring into market a smaller scale hydrogen storage system that is an integrated system with battery as well. And that's really targeting a number of use cases in CNI, in particular telecommunications, mining, to name a few. So telco, as an example, for remote towers, there's 5 million of those globally. About 1 million of those use diesel, and a third of the operating costs of those remote telco towers is actually the diesel cost. Mm-hmm. So the opportunity here is to incorporate this technology to do two things. One, reduce the reliance on lithium. So the lithium batteries are lasting about 3 years in these sites, which is not great from a sustainability standpoint. And so augmenting that or replacing that lithium and the diesel generation backup with a hybrid system that we've developed has got a lot of not just environmental but economic benefits. So that's in the telco as an example. Mining is a really interesting one for us as well. A lot of interest in mining. So 10% of Australia's consumption, energy consumption, I think they consume about 5 billion litres of diesel a year. So any opportunity there to really start looking to replace or at least augment diesel generation across the mining sector is a very large opportunity for us. And then just in general in the remote areas where you're dealing with intermittent costly energy supply, where diesel generation is largely the preferred option. Again, this technology becomes very, very important to help with transitional energy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jacques. Ben, over to you. Some real world examples where you're seeing storage really creating that pathway for more renewable energy to be consumed.
Yes, thanks, Megan. So, at Evergen, we control roughly 7,000 homes and businesses and sites, which include now solar farms and some large commercial, industrial, shopping centres, things like that, which all have storage in them. And some of them is behind the meter, some of them it's in front of the meter. And one of the great things about storage is obviously there's lots of different types of chemistries and duration, and they can be useful in lots of different ways depending on what type of value you want to create from them. So for instance, if you're the Hornsdale Power Reserve or equally a battery in one of our FCAS targeted fleets, then it's the speed to response and the fast frequency response that's key. So lithium ion battery is really, really good for that. If, however, you're a standalone power system and currently you might have a diesel generator connected to solar on a telco tower or something, then we believe very passionately in transitioning those diesel units out for things like hydrogen storage, and we partner with Lavo and others on that type of solution. But I think as someone who's been passionately behind the transition to a sort of a much more decentralized, flexible energy system that's kind of a network of smaller networks rather than what we have, at least in Australia, where we're sort of still dominated in terms of our baseload by the aging coal fleet, which now, thankfully, they're going to retire quicker than even AEMO's fast transition thought. That creates challenges, but also opportunities. And we see now, not just in our work in Australia, but Evergen's involved in projects in North America, in Latin America, in Europe, and in parts of the MENA region. It's like storage is a massive priority because it creates flexibility and it allows people to invest in large scale utility solar and wind projects, knowing that energy can be stored for when it's most viably used. And so hopefully the end of load shedding and things like the networks penalizing people for having too much solar during the day, like those things should not be conversations we're having. They should be storing energy for when it's most valuable.
I love that. No more being constrained off would be awesome. Okay, the next question. So I did do a little bit of digging to find out how much storage we have. So, and I totally had a great look at the big battery storage map from the Renew Economy team. And they've listed at the moment in terms of grid scale batteries that we've got 9 that are currently operating and another 10 under construction. And that gives us, if you can add it up, a capacity of 623 megawatts. In terms of residential, it was a little bit harder to find, but I'm sure somebody on the panel can probably help me with that in terms of how much is there. I know in 2020, there were over 20,000 units sold to homes. So who's buying the storage and what are they buying it for? And is this changing as battery storage develops? And I might start with Ben this time. Over to you.
Sure. So a few reasonably accurate stats just around home battery adoption. And obviously homes was where it began in Australia because of the time of use energy system and the very high penetration of rooftop solar. So as at the end of last year, there were roughly 130,000 installed batteries behind the meter in homes, of which about half we estimate is kind of current generation and bigger than 5 kilowatt hours, which sort of makes them useful. And people's reasons for buying those is energy independence, but also financially they're now viable, even on a time of use energy tariff and without participating in VPPs or network sponsored initiatives. There are good government subsidies. The payback is reasonable. We sort of see paybacks between 5 and 7 years, depending on what you do with them. And I think people who can afford it, and this is one of the great issues here, is like the inequality of the opportunity. And Saul Griffiths in his book, Electrify or The Big Switch, which talks about Australia, points out that the kind of inequity in who can afford to adopt these technologies is a problem, right? And finance is the answer, whether it be government subsidies or state government subsidies or long duration interest-free loans. So we see more and more of these things will be adopted and they will be behind the meter because there's a massive penetration of rooftop solar. But batteries are being deployed in all sorts of interesting places, whether it be in front of a coal-fired power station or in the middle of the desert or on wind turbines or on utility scale solar farms. And they're not all used for the same thing. The chemistry is not the same. We see gravity batteries as well as pumped hydro. So like people hoisting big bits of metal up in the air and then lowering it down on mine sites. But I think the key thing is, as we all know, storage is tremendously important. The question is where do you put it first? And I think one of the things that has really just come out over the last couple of weeks with the early retirement of Origin's great big power station is it's clearly demonstrating that investment in transition or transmission has not been considered properly, and there's now going to be a big problem. Storage can largely solve that problem, transition scale storage. And so I think we're just seeing batteries everywhere. We're working on all sorts of interesting things, including like liquid metal batteries and gel ion batteries. Like we're sort of agnostic to what the hardware is and what the technology is. We just think things should be fit for purpose and ideally as renewable and sustainable as possible. So anyway, we're very excited now that this transition is seemingly taking place.
Thank you very much for that, Ben. Jacques, over to you.
So the question again, sorry, Megan.
Of course, not a problem.
I was just saying wrapped with Ben's delivery there.
That's all right, not a drama. So who's buying the storage and what are they buying it for?
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting journey for us. So we've actually secured several thousand pre-orders for smaller scale system, which is really targeting commercial and industrial applications. But we've seen a lot of uptake in residential systems, residential homes as well. About half of the several thousand pre-orders have come from Australia, the other half from about 30 other countries. And it's interesting because the price point here is still pretty high and the economics need to really come down for what is a pretty expensive unit cost. But largely, a lot of the drivers there in that smaller end of town has been, as Ben has talked about, is just wanting that energy independence. People wanting to take control of their energy needs, and sustainability being a really key driver here as well. It's not just something people talk about. It's now happening in terms of what people are prepared to pay for. So certainly in a residential area, that's happening, but we need to see a bit more policy reform for, we think, the economics to make sense in that end of the market. In the commercial and industrial space, it's very different. Our levelized cost of energy is very comparable to existing technologies. And that's because the value stacks are higher there. So you're able to participate in a wholesale energy market. You can get, instant asset write-offs, et cetera, as businesses and so forth. And for them, it's really just an economic play, a techno-economic play. So in the C&I space, based on our modeling, certainly it would suggest that the levelized cost of energy is very comparable to lithium. And in the case of diesel, if you talk about a 20-year or 30-year life, we're about 25 to 35% cheaper on an LCOE basis. So yes, the upfront capex is higher, but the opex cost is almost nil because you're effectively using free energy. So that's pretty exciting for us, and so a lot of interest in that particular space. And then in the utility space, we've secured a significant order. I can disclose sort of north of $300 million of orders from Providence Asset Group and by proxy Infrastructure Capital Group, who have invested across our portfolio of solar farms. And that's for the installation of this hybrid technology storage, offering both shallow, medium, and deep storage into the several hours, so 24 plus hours of storage, because it's a big problem to solve for. What do you do with all this excess energy? And as Ben alluded to, the curtailment of these solar farms is becoming a huge issue, and negative pricing now as well. The frequency of that's becoming more and more prevalent. So, with the need to find storage is a missing piece of the puzzle, and that's what we're all about.
Fabulous. Thanks, Jacques, for that. I did tell the audience that we'd fly from residential to grid scale, and you just covered seasonal as well. So we're all over all different size energy storage solutions as well as technology, which is pretty exciting. I might move on to the next question. And Ben mentioned a number of the technologies, so Jacques and Christian. So we've got pumped hydro, lithium ion, hydrogen, liquid metal flow, supercapacitors, gravity, which Ben did totally mention before, and there's lots of tech developments in the storage sector. So for the panel, what developments are you seeing in terms of the existing key technologies around storage, and is there a new kid or kids on the block that are starting to come through? Christian, I might start with you for this one.
Look, in terms of new kids on the block, I'll start off by saying I'm a Bolton Amps guy, not a chemist. So I think in terms of chemical constructions of energy storage, probably better off asking someone else. What I will say is that lithium is a finite resource, and I think we're all anticipating the entry of electric vehicles into the market, and that will probably soak up a lot of what we have capability for. The mobile phone market obviously will continue as well, and we will have to turn our eyes to making sure we have a good mix of technologies that can fill different spaces for different needs. And I think everything you've talked about, whether it is, vanadium, flow batteries, or whether it is other things, it'll all need to be part of that mix. And we're talking about energy density versus, I suppose the power density. And those are two different things when you're looking about how you utilize stuff as well. I don't know whether we'll have compressed air that will form a part of the storage as well. So we need to think bigger than just lithium ion. And I think we need to consider, we understand the technology well, but we need to consider alternatives outside of that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Christian. I was just reading an article about how the challenges around the economics and the availability of lithium ion, and how the EVs are soaking up all of the reserves, leaving residential batteries to sit a little bit higher than what they otherwise would have. Anyway, it's not about me, it's about the panel. So Ben, I might hand over to you on that one. What sort of new developments are you seeing, or is there, and are there any new exciting technologies for storage that are coming through?
Well, I think scarcity creates innovation, and obviously, like EVs are in many countries with progressive policies around the world, there are more EVs sold now than there are fossil fuel driven automobiles. And I'm a bit sad that Australia's been so slow with the adoption, but what that has done is obviously create pressure on the raw materials. We all talk about lithium. There's heaps of innovation. So whether there's new versions of old batteries, like there's a great company called Gel Iron that does basically a simpler version of what used to be flow technology that's kind of like gel. It's much better for the planet than things like lead acid batteries or lithium ion batteries. But equally, we're seeing all the hardware manufacturers invest in life and the number of cycles. So whereas like sort of the even current generation lithium ion batteries, you're limited with the number of cycles you might do. So you might be warranted for a 1 cycle a day for 7 to 10 years. There are lithium ion batteries now coming out that are 20,000 cycles and unlimited warranty. So that the chemistry is evolving and reliability is evolving and manufacturing quality is evolving, and ultimately we expect and hope cost to come down. But I think there will continue to be innovation. I mean, we have some engagement with a company in the US called Ambry that does these ginormous liquid metal batteries that sit on things like aluminium smelters. So they heat up aluminium to the point where it melts, and then they store the molten aluminium with all the energy in there, and then they convert that back to electricity when they need it. So there's all sorts of approaches, and we talk about things like heat from the earth. There's a great startup called MGA Thermal out of Newcastle, actually, who's doing a really good job with that. There's compressed air. Like, there's lots of different types of storage. I think the challenge for us, and if I come back to Evergen's role in all of this, is that we just focus on making these devices useful as part of the energy system as a whole and connecting things together. So we focus on how capable APIs are and cybersecurity and all of this type of thing to make these devices useful, because in most cases, the most value can be extracted by trading devices as part of a fleet or a larger orchestrated system or in the market than just shifting load on a single site. And that, I think, is the future of the energy system globally, is that there'll be more distribution, more markets for flexibility and capacity and other services that storage of different types are really uniquely positioned to deliver. And really, there's a great quote from actually the CEO of Shell recently that's kind of like, if I can choose when to deliver people electricity, I can make it really, really cheap. And that's what we all want, is we want cheaper electricity because we're going to need more electricity and we want to electrify things more quickly. And again, back to the key thing, is storage of all different types creates that possibility, and we're delighted to be part of that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. And Jacques, over to you again. And just to remind you, because there was a few chats in between me asking that question and you, it's really about what sort of emerging tech and new kids on the block you're seeing around storage.
Yeah, sure. Look, so we're all about we've placed a big bet on metal hydride technology. For those who are not familiar with metal hydrides are not necessarily new. They've been around since the Second World War, but the breakthrough that our R&D partner at University of New South Wales have come through is to develop a hydride that works in concert with an electrolyzer and a fuel cell. So metal hydrides are just that, they're metal. Hydride is something that is a name given to the bonding of hydrogen molecules to the metal at a crystalline or atomic level structure. So the university developed this technology and really advanced it to a point where it solves a number of important problems. First and foremost is energy density. So we're at 2 to 3 times the energy density of other traditional hydrogen storage and lithium batteries. So we're sitting at about 555 watt hours per kilogram. So you think lithium is at around 200 watt hours per kilogram. So that's a very, very high energy density. But importantly, it's actually around sustainability as well. So the hydride is 100% recyclable at end of life. There's no toxic material. There's no precious metals in there. It's all common alloy, mostly out of the ground here in Australia. And it lasts about 3 times longer than standard lithium. So we are getting already 20,000 cycles, discharging cycles from the hydride. And that translates to about 30 years of asset life. From a safety standpoint, a lot of people obviously have understandably concerns around hydrogen from a safety standpoint. But again, one of the key breakthroughs here was the application of low pressure at 30 bar pressure, which actually matches back to an electrolyzer for that bonding process to occur. So it's nothing like the 500 or 700 bar pressure tanks that traditionally hydrogen is typically stored. So we're getting higher energy density at very, very low pressure, and we're not applying a huge amount of temperature, which is what typically other hydrides have to do in the market. So that's really important. The other key element there as well is that it's pretty much zero capacity loss over the life of that asset. In fact, we've seen in laboratory conditions 40,000 cycles at zero capacity loss over the life of the asset. So that's quite remarkable. And this technology now is commercially being brought to the market, which we believe is going to be a real game changer. So yes, there's a lot of other technologies out there. I think Ben, you've already spoke to a few of those. Clearly, flow batteries coming up, and we can't wait for these technologies to start forming part of our ecosystem. There's thermal energy storage, phase change, which I think, Ben, you alluded to in terms of aluminium. There's GK and Hydrogen over in Germany, who are also doing metal hydrides similar to ours, but a lot less cycles, a number of charging and discharging cycles. So that's a bit of a snapshot on metal hydrides. And what it does is then also when you reduce the pressure, that then powers a fuel cell, which can then obviously provide the energy for longer duration storage. So the way I think about hydrogen and batteries together is your battery energy storage is your short distance runner, a bit like a Usain Bolt, and then your hydrogen energy storage offers that long duration, long distance runner, which takes over from the battery. That also has the advantage of then reducing the amount of requirements for traditional lithium battery as well. So it's a hybrid, it's an ecosystem, and we see metal hydrides as just one of a number of really critical core technologies that we're busy integrating.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for that, Jacques. So we have on this panel right with us right now an incredible startup in Lavo and Evergen, who work with batteries all the time. So two really important startups in the Australian ecosystem and obviously working internationally as well. So I would like to ask the panel, particularly given Energy Lab's usual audience, is what new and exciting startups or promising research projects are you seeing coming through that might be the next big thing? Oh, I should say who I want to ask that question. Sorry, totally my bad. Ben, I might start with you. Thank you.
Sure. So I think something that everyone will be aware of is that, like, at scale, what we're seeing in electricity is sort of this alignment with finance and telecommunication and other utilities. And sort of, so as an example, Telstra now focusing on energy, and the potentially they could be tremendously powerful in a new energy ecosystem with several million customers, and they own a fair chunk of renewable assets. Equally, AGL offers a phone plan, and we engage in work with quite a lot of major financial institutions who are involved in energy or considering retailing energy. And so I think at scale, there's this tremendous transition happening now, and I think Mike Cannon-Brookes and the Brookfield bid over the last couple of weekends just demonstrates that things are going to be shaken up at scale and change probably much faster than most people think. So I think it's a really exciting time in the industry, and not just in Australia, but elsewhere in the world. I mean, Australia, we sort of see it as a bit of a petri dish for research that's applicable elsewhere in the world. And certainly aspects of what we do at Evergen in Australia are relevant in different parts of the world. But I think as someone who's been driving for the speed of the transition to pick up for the last 3 years, like, we're excited by the scale of some of these things and the coming together of really ginormous buckets of cash. And I think what we all need really is we need clarity around the 10-year horizon around regulations and the cost of capital accordingly. But I think the declaration that these major assets are going to close sooner than everyone thinks, in many respects, provides the clarity that everyone needs to deploy technology at scale. And I think it's a really exciting time to be in the energy industry.
Absolutely. There is no doubt about that. Some of the happenings in the market over the last couple of weeks have been really, really interesting. Actually, I'm on a panel with one of the team from Telstra Energy in a couple of weeks at InLit, so it should be interesting to hear more about what they are doing. Jacques, over to you for that. Are you seeing any other startups around that might be a new exciting thing that we'll see coming through, particularly in Australia, if not internationally?
Look, I think in Australia, unfortunately, far too few. I would say in the energy space. I think at an academic level, there is just an incredible pipeline of amazing innovation. In our partners, UNSW in particular, I mean, this is a university that brought us photovoltaics, a lot of battery innovation, wireless technology, green steel production. I mean, there's just been a huge amount of innovation. Quantum computing is another one, and more recently, metal hydride. Through the Hydrogen Energy Research Centre. But unfortunately, it's that translation bit that's not happening fast enough, certainly for the transition that we need to see, not just in Australia, but globally. So not enough, unfortunately, Megan. There are a few certainly happening overseas, markets like Germany and the US. I would say quite a lot more further down the path insofar as the number of innovations and startups happening, certainly in the clean tech space. I can think of a few here. Azelio, again, that's a really interesting startup, actually no longer a startup, they're more of a scale up, doing that phase changing technology that Ben also spoke about. There's Hydrolite, which is actually a magnesium based liquid type battery. There's GK and Hydrogen, again, not a startup, a company that sort of was a venture out of a larger organization. So there's a lot of really interesting players, but unfortunately not enough here in Australia. Yeah, we'd love to see more of that happening through the academic research that we're doing. If we could start translating that technology quicker into the real world in the likes of America, and you look at in the United States how quick a lot of that happens. I think there's a huge opportunity for improvement there. But it's exciting times in the energy space, and I think with a combination of government policy and creating the right environment, I think that will naturally occur if incentives are right.
Yeah, fantastic. I think you're right. It would be nice to see more happening here. Now, before Christian, I hand over to you for that question as well. I just need to acknowledge John, because I think that's 3 comments about the fact that we've already got heaps of technology. Please use what we've got. I think that's very true. I think there's lots of existing technology that we can definitely use to scale out. Now, Christian, over to you for any exciting startups that you've seen on the GHD side in your travels around the globe.
Well, probably I'll start off with saying that, well, we may not have had too much in the terms of new startups. I think there's a lot of good thinking going on. And one thing that Australia has proven that we are very, very good at is the adaptation of new technologies. And I think if I only look at, say, the use of large-scale batteries, even small-scale batteries, that ARENA has funded the development and review of virtual power plants to be able to provide ancillary services. So there is a good thinking around it. Even when you look at the recent developments in terms of jet and the V2G and V2H kind of applications, there is a lot of technology being developed to support the adaptation of technology and the acceleration of it. So I think that is one good thing. You always need more than one tool in your toolbox. So I think a broad range of technologies is absolutely necessary. What I think we have seen, though, is a focus on lithium, and that will change. And I think there will need to be a mix-up of things. That's not to say that that doesn't exist, but there will need to be adaptation, and that will accelerate new technology, I suppose, being built at scale in an economy that is then, I suppose, able to be integrated. So I'll leave it at that. I think we'll probably want to be able to get on to some audience questions as well.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Christian. I was about to do that. You can take over my job anytime that you want. So the first question that we've got, that I've got in my list, and it's probably not in the same list that exists, but one from Emma Jenkin. What is the status, availability and cost of long duration storage? Are there examples of long storage overseas? And can this replace the need for gas peakers? Who wants to have a go at that question?
I'll have a crack at it from a utility scale, just in the hydride space. So the levelized cost of energy modeling that we've done, based on pretty uneconomical costs of some supply. So, for example, fuel cells, electrolyzers are still coming down that cost curve, haven't yet found their point yet by any stretch. For us, the rate of return for, if you take a 5 megawatt scale solar farm with a traditional lithium as your primary storage, that returns between about 8 and 10% IRR. If you overlay the hydrogen energy storage system, that actually jumps by about two points there to about 10 to 12%. So there is, from an LCOE standpoint, it does certainly stack up in the utility scale, even at some of the high prices that we see today. So that's only going to get significantly better as the industry scales. And I think the point was well made earlier about lithium. Unfortunately, with lithium, the economics become quite ugly the larger you get, because the cost curve is quite linear. Whereas with the hydrogen technology, it's actually incrementally not that much more. So the ability to scale up the amount of energy you can store is actually, from a cost standpoint, very competitive, particularly in that larger end of town. So LCOE does certainly look pretty good, even at today's numbers.
Thanks, Jacques. Ben or Christian, would you like to have a go at that question, or we can move on to the next one?
I'll throw in a comment. I mean, look, in terms of just think about the fact that gas peakers make 90% of their money in 10% of the time. So they run for very short bursts of time, particularly at peak demand or when there's shortfalls. So yes, I think that batteries could eventually fill that gap. Certainly when you're looking at gas prices and where they're moving, they will be able to do so economically. I think in terms of long-term support and reliability purposes, it's going to be very challenging for building energy storage other than, say, something long-lasting, whether it's pump storage hydro, to be able to match that. But even so, we're seeing in the pump storage space adaptation of technologies that can provide more flexibility. You may be aware there are double-fed induction generator pump storage hydro plants in Portugal and in Switzerland that provide much more speedy response and flexibility. So there are some developments in that space, and I think we will be able to, if we wanted, to find a replacement for gas peakers at an economical way to do so.
Great, thank you, Christian. We'll move on to the next question, which is about virtual power plants. So from Bill Thompson, are distributed or micro storage or network of network storage solutions as effective as grid scale when it comes to unit cost, I guess overall cost?
Well, I'll take that one a little bit because we run 8 or 9 different virtual power plants using lots of distributed resources, and we are working on some sort of big 4 megawatt style, more centralized storage and solar things. I think, as with all things in electricity, it kind of depends, and it depends what's the problem you're trying to solve and for whom. And so I think, like Hornsdale Battery as an example, it does a really, really good job of what it's supposed to do. It's very revenue generative. It's focused largely on FCAS and ancillary services, and it soaks up heaps of the available FCAS because it does a really, really good job of that. Is it good at stabilizing the grid at an endpoint at the end of a stringy feeder of unmaintained network? No, but that's not what it's there to do. So I think, again, it's not a great answer to the question, other than, as with all things in electricity, it kind of depends like what the problem is and who you're trying to solve it for.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for that. Jacques, did you want to chip in on that one? I guess it really has been something that you work through every minute of the day in terms of those sorts of solutions.
The only thing I'd add is I think virtual power plants is the future. Microgrids and virtual power plants, it just makes an awful lot of sense on a whole number of levels. But again, I think in Australia, it's not as fast as we would love to see that happening. There's sort of, as Ben has talked about, Evergen's very much managing that already. But in markets like the US, we're seeing a lot of now renewed interest in virtual power plants and distributed generation being seen as the way forward, really, and community scale generation. So it is just a matter of time. But I think Ben gave some stats earlier, but 1 in 15 only have storage. And you ask, well, why do 1 in 4 have solar panels, but only 1 in 15 have storage? So there's clearly a barrier there still to overcome. And once that happens, I think we'll see a lot more uptake in virtual power plants where this energy is effectively being swishing around and being shared across the community, which makes an awful lot of sense from a techno-economic standpoint. But I think markets like the US are probably likely to get the jump on Australia potentially. Don't know, Ben, if you agree with that.
Well, I mean, the US is interesting. Like, it's like 7 times the NEM joined together with thousands of community network operators, and there's no retailer in many places. Like, so the system's just different. The physics is the same, but the system's different. US, they have lots of the problems of adoption of storage and rooftop solar across most of the country are actually to do with the regulations around installation. So it's really burdensome. It's almost like building a new house. That's how much paperwork you have to do to put solar on your roof. So there's a lot of really good work being done at simplifying the process, making it more accessible. But again, I think back to the core truth, right? And one of the John, who's making all the comments on the thing, made a good point, which is that the technology exists for us to transition away from burning fossil fuels at scale today. What we need is enough capital and a clear enough runway to just spend the next 5 years deploying wind and solar at scale. And that doesn't just mean at a utility scale. It means do a utility scale where it makes sense, but equally, the world is made up of distributed networks and microgrids, as we've talked about, and the whole community is off the grid. So there was a very powerful rule change that came through from the AMC finally this week, saying that network operators can now deploy standalone power systems and take communities at the end of the line off the grid if they think that's the lower cost solution. fabulous, right? That creates
Fantastic. I agree.
enormous opportunity. It's been done in Western Australia for years, and finally now in the NEM, people like Endeavour and Essential and the others can do that, and I think that's great. And what that'll mean is less bushfires, less maintenance of stringy feeders, more in community independence. Community solar farms, like some of the PAG solar farms, are designed really for local communities to benefit from renewables, and I think we need all of these things, and they're all possible. And what we're seeing, I think, now is that the regulations are getting out of the way, and rather than being a handbrake around uncertainty, I think people like AMO and the AMC are now very much taking the position of trying to enable a rapid transition whilst keeping the lights on. And I think that's a really positive change for Australia, and we're seeing similar elsewhere in the world, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I agree, Ben. It was so exciting to see that rule change come in. It's been talked about for a very long time. It was excellent. I have a question from Julia Stein. How do your storage solutions differ from the popular Tesla Powerwall? In your opinion, what's the best storage solution for residential applications and why? Jacques, I might hand to you first for that and then to Ben.
Yeah, sure. I think it all depends on the specifics. Again, as Ben said, it all depends when it comes to energy. So if you look at the average Australian, if you were to take a moderate home of energy consumption, and for moderate, we'd say sort of 20 kilowatts per day, 20 kilowatt hours per day, then, certainly batteries start to make a lot of sense. And again, it comes down to your solar radiation levels, your location, the angle of the panels, what's your consumption? Do you typically use your energy in the daytime, nighttime, etc.? For some of those homes, certainly where energy is being used on the shoulders, probably a battery that can store 2 or 3 hours of energy is more than enough in many cases. But if you're a significant user of energy, particularly in the evenings, so a small business or a homestead, then batteries start to become problematic from a purely economic standpoint. So for us, for example, our equivalent size, smaller size hybrid system has a levelized cost of energy of 25.4 cents per kilowatt, which is actually ballpark exactly in line with the Tesla Powerwall 2. That's for a home that has a moderate to large amount of energy need. And again, it depends on your level of solar radiation, how you use it, a number of factors that come into it there as well. And then the overlay there would be the technology. So Evergen's technology, gets a 23% uplift or so. Ben, I know I'm sort of stealing your thunder here, but a 23% uplift in overall energy optimization. So that's another way you can actually improve the economics quite considerably just by having a lot more smarts built into it.
Thanks. And Ben, your take on that one.
Yeah, so we work with lots of battery retailers and installers and lots of big utilities who are now selling and installing batteries in people's homes. And we also integrate with pretty much every battery and inverter that's available in Australia and has an API to connect to. And so what we know is that different batteries are good for different things and different size families, right? So we would recommend not installing or selling a battery smaller than 5 kilowatts because that's kind of a useful thing around load shifting and demand management. But equally, not every family needs a Tesla. They're pretty expensive in a per kilowatt hour basis, but they're an amazing product. Software is fabulous. We love Tesla. I think we control more Teslas than anyone in Australia apart from Tesla. So they're a very long-standing partner of ours. But again, it's horses for courses. So different batteries are good for different things. And if your objective is to be off the grid and largely not trading energy from your house, just being self-sufficient, then you'll make a choice. You'll probably oversize your battery and your solar, and that'll be your choice. If you're someone who wants to participate in VPPs, you'll probably choose a battery like one of the manufacturers we talk about, like Senec, have 20,000 cycles as a warranty. Very, very good if you want to be generating revenue and trading an asset. So there's lots of different variables to consider in the choice, but kind of value for money and lifetime. Like we talked about, Jacques mentioned a horrific figure of 3 years life for lithium-ion batteries in the middle of nowhere in a hostile environment, I should say. In homes, we expect them to last between 7 and 10 years, and early evidence from Europe suggests that some batteries in Europe last as much as 20 years with only maybe 20% degradation. So it's still early to see these things, but I would just suggest to anyone go and get 3 quotes, just like you would if you were going to go and buy a car, and really try and size it, not just for what your family does today, but I think we should all be sitting here thinking that our next vehicle is going to be an electric vehicle. And with that in mind, you then begin asking the question, well, am I going to charge it at home, or am I going to charge it for free at work and then bring that energy home? So think 5 years into the future, not just around today when making these decisions. There's lots of great products out there, though. There really are.
Thank you very much. I will keep going with questions. There's probably more questions than what we're going to get through, which is a nice problem to have. So from Arvind, we've got FCAS dispatching power is all software dependent. How do we confirm the actual performance of these assets actually working? Do companies like Evergen provide asset management along with their software suite of solutions?
Great question. So FCAS is not all software enabled. Like, I wish it was, and in many respects I believe it should be, but having a meter somewhere near the device to detect, even if it's a meter on a battery, to detect the variance in frequency is super important, because otherwise you don't know what you're responding to. The second thing is, in terms of asset management, Evergen, sure, we build lots of different software platforms, including some in use for asset managing things like solar farms. We provide those as software, but we can also provide that together with one of our partners as a service, so asset management as a service. And what we're seeing is some of the tools that we're building, increasing the efficiency of an asset manager by about 5x on what they'd be able to do without some of the monitoring and predictive maintenance and other things that we're able to now deploy by monitoring these assets. So if you'd like to talk about that, hit me up, send me an email. It's pretty easy to get a hold of me. But again, software is super useful because of the flexibility it brings, and it allows people like us to change the recipe for what an asset or what a fleet of assets is doing, like, immediately. So if regulations change, or if the asset owner has a new priority for what a certain asset's doing, we can change that without sending anyone to site immediately. And I think that's the beautiful thing about what we do, is we enable asset owners to create maximum possible returns over the life of these assets.
Thank you. We've got another question here. What are the major challenges, and I would just add in there, from my theory, apart from time, that need to be solved in order for large-scale storage to play a key role in the transition away from coal-fired baseload power generation? Jacques, do you want to have a crack at
I think
that? And then
obviously
Christian?
timing is the obvious one. The other one is just cost. You know, we are still, storage is still at that high point of cost curve. You look at PV panels, and you know what is a factor of 30 that came down over the course of 5 years in terms of cost. That will start happening in electrolyzers. We're already starting to see that with electrolyzers and fuel cells. So we have a joint venture partnership with NedStack on fuel cell production, hopefully going to be happening very soon in Queensland over the next 12 or so months. And that's really to get that cost curve down, which can then be passed on and benefiting end consumers. So it will happen. It's just cost is the big thing in storage. Lithium, you have different reports out there. If you believe everything Elon says, you know, then they're going to be as cheap as chips. If you look at what DNV put out the other day, they suggested that it's not as rosy as what Elon would suggest, and that the cost is likely, yes, to come down, but maybe not as much as people think. But then you overlay what Christian's comments around the demand for lithium and how that's just going to continue growing with cars and so forth. And so you don't have to be an economist to figure that out, that at some point that inflection point might not be as great as everyone thinks. And it's not a very sustainable path either as a standalone technology. So I think cost is a big one. Obviously timing is the other challenge there, but I would still stay with cost. I think one of the participants, John, might have mentioned, you know, it's not just new technology, it's existing technology. How do we get the most out of those existing platforms to really sweat the asset as much as we possibly can? And then I'd say value engineering. So we're at the sort of bleeding edge of cutting edge technology. And so there's a lot of value engineering work, meaning the opportunity to take out redundancy in the system so that you can actually pull cost out as we scale up. So yes, definitely that's an opportunity. And hopefully Australia can play a role in that manufacturing journey as well to bring that cost down.
Thanks for that, Jacques. Christian, over to you. Is there what other barriers do you think are in the way, or problems we need to solve to be able to really make that transition away from coal-fired power?
think if you look at, energy storage will be necessary, both at the large scale and the small scale, both for the purpose of security as well as reliability. And we'll see a need for it. We see a continuing downward pressure onto wholesale energy prices, and that will continue. We had seen previously a converse increase in ancillary services costs, but with batteries, that has also started to be pushed down a bit. So we'll see more fluctuations, but generally a trend downwards, and that'll certainly encourage the adaptation of more technology. I think where we will be challenged is that the speed of response that will be necessary as we see more and more coal generation withdrawal and more electronic, say power electronic interfaced stuff, whether it's solar farms, batteries, wind turbines, and so forth. You will start to run into a bit of stuff that AEMO is already predicting as a challenge in both the ISP, the Renewable Integration Study, the engineering framework, and so forth, which is, it's great to have all this stuff. Is it going to be fast enough, or are we going to be seeing more problems and challenges? Are we going to be the lady who swallowed the fly? So I think putting some solid engineering thought to how we address this, and both Ben and Jacques have raised some good issues and some good solutions, is going to be very important. So get ahead of the curve, figure out the problems, which will be frequency management, voltage control, system strength, and so forth, and how we can adapt technology to do that.
Great. Thank you very much. We've got time for one more short question before having to wrap up. I might ask my own, sorry, audience. There was one that we talked about a little bit, and it's really got to do, we Energy Lab, we work with startups all the time. If particularly for Ben and Jacques, if you were thinking about opportunities in this space, if you can see gaps in the market, what would you go after if you had the opportunity?
Sure, I might take that one because I think I have probably a somewhat interesting perspective. So I came to energy to run Evergen from a background in building and helping other people build disruptive software businesses around different industries. And I massively underestimated how difficult electricity is to disrupt. And you've got obviously regulations, and you've got politics, and you've got a whole heap of things that aren't just related to the physics or the economics. You've got it's just a nightmare. So the one thing that I did when I took over at Evergen was I adopted a very collaborative position, and we collaborate not just with our peers, but also with frenemies, as we call them, where we're actually helping partners who are friends, but at some point may become enemies as things change to grow. And the way that we see this is that as a disruptor in an industry like energy, what you need to do is get big enough, whether it be by yourself or together by partnering with others, that you're hard to get rid of. Because you've got to assume that the big incumbents, they kind of want to have things their own way. And that's how these things pan out. So I would say to anyone thinking of starting a business in energy, it's difficult. It's probably more difficult than any other space that I've encountered in all of my years running accelerators and coaching other founders and investors. But it's possible. And I think it's hard to understand this from an Australian perspective, because we feel like we're several years into the transition, but globally we're at the beginning of a 20-year transition, and it's it is an opportunity of a lifetime right now in energy, and lots of super smart people are choosing to work on this problem because climate change is undeniable. So we welcome you aboard. If anyone wants to talk to me about that, just reach out. Always happy to have a coffee.
Thanks, Ben. I think that's an awesome answer. It is a big deal, but you're right, there's still lots of time left. It's not like all the solutions are here and ready to go. So thank you. I am going to wrap things up. So we have definitely run out of time for questions. Thank you very much, Jacques and Ben, and Christian needed to go. And unfortunately, Laura, even though we checked and checked again, we just had unfortunately technical difficulties today, which meant that Laura Jones couldn't join us. This event's been recorded, so you can find it online a little bit later. A quick announcement for any startups who are still here. We're accepting applications for both our Scale Up program and our Climate Solutions Accelerator for 2022. So apply now. That would be amazing. I have one extra comment on today's event, and I think it was the comment of, it depends. So it seemed to be a really, really common thing when it comes to battery storage, but that's not a bad thing. I think that's an amazing thing, because it means we have lots of options to solve all the different challenges that we have in this space. So I think that was a super, super cool thing. So it depends is the theme of today. Thank you very much again, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you all later.
Thanks, everyone.